Donna, I just love your jacket. Where did you get it?
Well, several years ago, I was at the APQS fashion show, and Anita Krug won one of the prizes, and she was wearing a jacket similar to this, so afterwards I asked if she would make one for me, and she was kind enough to do so.
Well, we have many garments to show you today,
so stay tuned.
Quilt Central is made possible in part by Bernina of America. Nothing sews like a Bernina. Nothing. Quilting Machines International, providing quilting machines and supplies for the world. Sulky of America, taking creativity to new heights with decorated threads, stabilizers, and books. American Professional Quilting Systems, hand-guided elegance. The American Quilter Society, dedicated to promoting today's quilter. Paducah, McCracken County Convention and Visitors Bureau. Paducah, where no one is a stranger. Additional funding was provided by these companies that care about quilting. Welcome to Quilt Central, celebrating quilting in everyday living, with your hosts, Jane Donaldson and Donna Wilder.
My guest today is going to share some special techniques that will enhance your wearable art. Joining me is Marlis Bennet. Welcome, Marlis.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here and be able to show you the techniques.
Well, what are we going to be making?
We're going to be working on a vest, and the vest front has cathedral windows on one side, which is fabric that you open up and just actually make bloom and show fabric behind. And the other side is it looks pieced, but it's that little patchwork section, and we're going to show you how to do that today too.
It is so elegant. If you want to leave that here, I'd be happy to keep it.
I'd love to.
Show me how we do this now.
Okay. We're going to start making our cathedral windows.
Okay.
The cathedral windows require that you have 2 strips of fabric that has been cut on the bias.
Okay.
The bias is the important part because you want them, when you open them back up, you need to have that wide space in there. If you don't cut it on the bias, it will not bloom nicely. You want to sew with a very long stitch down the center. I usually have a straight stitch set on about a 4mm length.
Okay.
And that will, if you'll notice, it does kind of make it a little weighty, but that presses out, and that stitch doesn't stay in either. Once this is sewn, you then want to come in with another stitch and do some tack downs on it because at different intervals, because that's where you're going to open it. And this one has been sewn. If I were just to open this piece right now with an iron and press it open, you can see the right side of the fabric.
Right.
At this point, you need to have those tack downs sewn.
So you've opened it up, and now you do the tack downs.
Do very little tiny tack downs, and these are at about 3 inches apart. You know, what I do when I'm measuring a garment is I measure the length of the garment and then divide that by an odd number. And then that way I can usually figure out how long these have to be.
Okay.
But 3 inches apart is about as close as you want to work with these. Your next step then is to put a back piece of fabric on it. On the vest itself, I've used some of the ribbons that are available, and they're on cards. What I did is I took the cards of ribbons and just zigzagged the 3 ribbons together. All the guesswork has been done for you because they already match when they're on.
They color coordinated them.
Right. So all you do is zigzag monofilament thread, put those together. But today I'm going to use some fabric. You need to place your fabric strip behind it. Whatever you want to show through has to be behind the fabric that you're going to make blossom.
And then you folded it back so that you can stitch that into position.
Into position. If it were just a ribbon, you will take a regular zigzag stitch and just sew down that strip. And you'll want to do that on both sides. And I won't finish sewing that because everybody can sew a straight stitch. Then it comes time to open up these stitches that are right in the center right here. Just take a pair of scissors or even your reverse sewing tool. You know, most machines do come with that, and we don't like to use that very often. But just open that up, and you notice that it's very easy to do. Once that's been done, Then comes the real fun part. You make this blossom by opening up your cathedral windows. I usually take a few straight pins and pin them in place, and then I'm going to show you a very special stitch, because everybody does this, the sewing down of these, with a straight stitch. But I'm going to show you on the machine how to use a blind hem stitch that is in the quilt menu on many of the machines that are out on the market. It looks like a blind hem, but it's already been set smaller than what you would use for a blind hem.
And this is where your bias really is nice, because it rolls around so easily.
It rolls open very, very easily. And it will take a bite into the fabric, and then you just, right off the edge of the fabric, will sew around. Now, I would not do this with a red thread.
Right.
I would do this with monofilament thread, and then you can see how easily this just stayed open right here on this one side. You move the thread out of the way. And you would continue all the way down. I've then taken what we call a football stitch. This is stitch number 407 on this machine, but it just makes a very tiny little kind of a oblong satin stitch and sewn on both sides so that it stays in place and secured it to the back. And that's all that there really is to making cathedral windows.
Well, they look easy doing it that way, and you don't have all that hand stitching that everybody does when they stitch around them.
Oh, hand stitching is a 4-letter word. Okay, now we're going to do our little patchwork piece. And this is very, very easy. I've taken a background fabric, and it's a great place to use some of that fabric that's in your resource center that you don't like anymore.
Right.
But take your grid and grid it off, and I did 1-inch grids.
Okay.
Because all of my little color pots of fabric are in an 1.25 inch cut. Once I have my piece has been all gridded, then I use a fusible web in a can and spray it. And then I can just place all of these little colors down onto this piece one by one. I have a grid that will help me along, showing me where to line them up. And then I'll use a very little iron like this to iron them into place. That way I really can do this while I'm sitting at my ironing board.
I love that little iron. That's very good.
And don't have to get up all the time, because you have to work from the top to the bottom, covering, and I have found from the left to the right works the very best. Once you have all of those ironed down, then comes the fun part. Because first of all, you need to couch down with a plain zigzag stitch.
Okay.
You want to sew these in place, and I'm going to not do that today because I've already got my machine set up for the best part of this whole project, and that is the couching. There are several feet that are available for couching, and couching is a technique where you take threads and put them down to cover your seams or to add highlights, such as what is in your jacket.
A lot of couching in my jacket.
Right, so that's what we're doing. And there are different feet that are available. They have an opening in the front through which you can put your yarns or decorative threads, and they lock them into place when you're sewing, so that when you're doing a zigzag or even a decorative stitch over the foot, it will, over the yarn, it will hold it for you, so you don't even have to guide.
And it stays perfectly straight then, instead of moving, which it so often does.
Yes, and that's really the difficult part. So I've already got this all set up. Now at home, I would recommend that you have a monofilament thread, or maybe even have a thread that matches some of the yarns. And they have wonderful yarn packs that are available that already have the yarns with the thread matched. So there's no guesswork there. It's all going to go together. I'm going to use just a very simple zigzag for this. And yes, I have red thread on here, but that's so that everybody can see where I'm going with this. And you want to just couch down your fabric along the lines, and you want to go in both directions when you do this. I like to sew the long ones first because it helps to hold everything in place. And then I will come through and do the cross section. And you can see back here all of the stitches that have come out.
Do you change your length according to the thickness of the yarn
My
you're
width,
using?
I do, yes.
That's what I meant, your width.
Because I want to make sure that it covers the yarn.
Okay.
Totally. And if I'm using a very thick one, then I'll just maybe use a feather stitch and sew down the center of it.
Okay.
And that way it has a little bit more movement to it.
Now, what would you do on top of this? What would be the next kind of yarn that you might select?
Oh, I might even use one of the lovely chenilles that's available. And you can see that that works beautifully too. Or there's some beautiful little feathered yarns.
Oh, I love those with the kind of little baby
eyelash.
tassel.
Yeah, the eyelashes.
That's it.
That hang off of them. So there you've got lots of options as far as couching goes.
Well, it's great to see how easy you can make things using the sewing machine, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
I have always wanted to know how to do chenille work on a long arm because I like to do everything speedy. So I have invited Marilyn Badger here to come and show us her tips on how to do that on a long arm. She has some of the most wonderful garments. Hi, Marilyn.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to see you.
Well, what can you show us today?
Well, like you say, it's really fast and easy to do this on a long arm. I'm sure that you've struggled with them on a sewing machine and it kills you. So what you do is you just mount, there are 6 layers of fabric involved, and I like to use the rayons because they're soft and they drape well. So you want to mount your fabrics on there as if it were a quilt. Your 6th layer is your backing, and your first top layer is your quilt top, and the 4 other layers go in like batting.
But how do you know what you're going to get for color when you mix them all up? How do you know how to stack them?
You need to do little squares, and so I cut out about a 6-inch square of all the fabrics 6 times so that you can do 6 squares and alternate that fabric with each one.
So you bring the one from the top around to the back, and then
and keep going until you've gone through the whole sequence.
And you have a
then you
here.
need to get them wet, and I just kind of rub them together like this and then throw them in the dryer to dry with a towel, and it'll make them fluff up.
So this is the same 6 fabrics but layered.
Alternated differently.
Alternated differently.
So you can see how different the look is. You want to make sure you do that before you do all this stitching because you want to get the best look. This is how it looks before you wash it.
So that would be this block here because it's
the same as this.
Well,
so once you figure that out, then you put them on the machine in that order. And you can see that I've marked my pattern piece on that top layer. You can mark it in a permanent pin because you're going to stitch right off the edges and trim it back down. It doesn't matter what you use to mark it. You want it to stay put so you know where you're stitching.
You want to stay on the diagonal because you pinned this on the grain with the selvage along the edge, but you want to be sure you get that, otherwise it won't fuzz up very well, will it?
You want to make that first diagonal mark on your pattern piece so that you've got that angle set, and that's got to be at a 45.
Well, I suppose you'd have to turn your pattern piece so you know you're getting the angles across the jacket or whatever.
To the selvage, right. So this is set on a 45-degree angle to this. And then we're going to set up our fence and get that same angle on our fence, bring my machine down and my fence, and I set it up, and I've already set my angle, so I just want to bring my fence over to where this wheel will ride up against my diagonal edge. Flip my brake, and then you can see when I come up that side, it's on that same angle.
You have a special little guide on that foot, I see.
This is our adapter foot that goes with the base and guides, and it gives me just the right space between these diagonal lines to slash. So I use that as my guide. So now once I get my brake over here and set, all I'm going to do is just stitch and let my wheel ride up against the arm here and go up. Now I can use that hopping foot as my guide, that little adapter foot, and scoop my fence over to where that's riding up against my previous stitching.
Give you about a half an inch, or?
And then come back. So I'm just looking at that adapter foot and letting it ride up against that previous stitching. And that's all you do. I can quilt up a yard of this in less than an hour. So your stitching is not taking you any time at all. Once you get it all stitched like that, then you want to slice. And so I cut my pattern out. I cut these top 5 layers off shorter and leave the back layer.
So you leave a little extra.
So that you can just get this right underneath that back layer and hold on and just slice right up.
So you've got a little tool that has a little foot on it.
It's a little rotary cutter in there, and it just slices right up that channel, and you don't have to worry about a thing.
That's slick, and then you won't cut the back layer because it's protected.
Right, which you do when you use scissors. Now, that's the way to do the continuous diagonals. If you want to do chevrons like this, you're going to need to put your base and your guides on the...
Okay, this is an extended throat plate or base.
And it slides right on the base of the machine, gives you a platform to hold a guide.
So it really is supporting it from under, and then you can actually use your ruler to press against it.
Right, and so if you're going to change directions, you want to stitch to here, wherever your mark is, where you're changing directions, then you would just flip it around and stitch down the side like
so
that.
that's a little support, and that looks like it would work real well.
So that is so that you don't have to break your stitching when you change directions.
But you still try to stay always on a bias, even though you're...
Always 45 degree, or it will need a haircut when you get done.
I have used other fabrics, but I think the loose weave and everything seems to work the best.
And try some hand-dyed rayons. They work up really well.
Oh.
The dye gives it a little bit extra thickness, so it fills in a lot. So
Well, your
that's what this
garments
is.
are absolutely gorgeous. Thank you for coming and showing us this.
Pleasure.
Continuing on our wearable theme, my guest today is going to show us how to take a whole cloth vest and with threads decorate it so that it looks really spectacular. Joining me is Joyce Drexler. Welcome, Joyce.
Great to be with you.
Well, you've always bring great things with you, and what are we going to look at today?
We are going to look at all those favorite fabrics that you always want to not sew on, but you want to look at forever. You can make these into vests and decorate them with thread, and then you actually have used some of that fabric in your closet.
Oh, good. This is a great example, isn't it, of what you're talking about?
Yes, this is done with the pretty shiny thread, and all we did was outline, straight stitch, free motion, the design of the fabric, and that's basically what you're going to do with all of these vests, is utilize what's there.
It's amazing, and it just takes it from a simple fabric and turns it into almost, it looks like it's almost trapuntoed, and it's just basically...
Because it's got a light batting inside.
Oh, it does. Okay, that's great then. I was right. This is spectacular. Now, this is a cloth concept, but I think we should talk about
This is actually making cloth on our water-soluble stabilizer.
Okay.
Using all threads. You make a grid first, and then you just fill it in, and Evelyn Howard made this.
Oh, it's just wonderful. I love the colors that you've used. They're obviously
and she
my
did
favorites.
this on a long arm.
Oh, it's just beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, let's go to some of those whole cloth vests, and you can tell me a little bit about these.
This one was made by Sue Motes. She's one of our educators, and she just used a mixture of some of the rayon threads and just kind of did a free-form idea over them. And she used the long arm machine on this one, too, and then channel quilted the edgings.
And is this a variegated yarn, or is that a multi-yarn? I mean,
That's
thread?
a multicolor. That's one that's blue and purple and aqua.
Looks great. Now, this one is a little more basic,
This
but it
one's
utilizes...
done in a soft cotton. We wanted to just embellish the thread, the area, with the print from the other side. If you turn that over.
See, you use that as your design.
Use that as a guide, right. And then it was actually a pinkish kind of fabric thread that looks a little different color against that green, but it's really
isn't
nice.
that nice?
So on this, it's the same thing here, only we used a darker color in it so you can see.
Oh, and you did
You can't
the-
reverse it.
It's clever.
Thank you.
All right, let's see what we have here is...
Now, this is actually upholstery fabric that's been embellished, and I had a lot of fun doing that with the sliver type thread. Again, that's very, very ultra shiny.
I'm going to show them the back because I want them to see...
The
now you can
difference.
see this is what the fabric looked like before, and now
What a difference.
the manufacturer should have done it this way. It's far prettier.
Thank you.
Oh, boy. And I love this fabric,
This
too.
is so nice. Patty Lee loves cats, and she did this. And she did a blanket, not a blanket stitch, but a feather stitch around each one of these. And it looks like all those cats have been appliqued on, but they're
does.
not.
It does.
They're simply embellished with the thread. Very simple.
Oh, very good. And this one is a lovely
This one, we used a little heavier loft of batting in it. And as you can see, this one has the twist thread, which is similar to this. Let me just get one of these. This one has two colors of thread that have been twisted together to form a color. That's why you see this more muted kind of speckled-like look. And then we just used the print once again to utilize the design.
And it almost looks like all those leaves were appliqued on there.
Good thing they aren't.
Yes. And this one is
This one is again
printed
using
fabric?
a decorative stitch and just going around some of the squares using different decorative stitches using the pretty shiny sliver-like thread.
Great.
And if you see in the lining, she did it also.
Oh, yes, that's fun. And this one has like oceans.
This one's done a little differently. Used a twin needle to go along the bands of the swirls of the fabric colors, and then we filled in with a stippling stitch in between.
Did she use netting in there, or is
No,
that just
no
the
netting.
fabric?
That's just the fabric.
Oh, isn't it fun the way it turns
So
out?
now you can look at fabrics in a different way, perhaps, and say, hey, I can make this really a beautiful
Yes,
thing.
let's look at this as the last one. we're
Patty
going
Lee
to...
also made that, and as you can see, she only embellished a few of the shells to just add the interest and top stitched with the sliver, and then left some not so that you could see the
Great.
difference.
Let's look at the mannequin and tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we're very happy about this. This is beautiful batik-like fabric that we've used the Holoshimmer type thread on. And when you use that hollow or sliver type thread, you have to have it vertical on your spool pin. And you should use like a 90 needle.
Oh, the color variation in that is just wonderful. The
And
way it goes.
it's also important that you lower your top tension so you don't break your threads.
Good. Well, as always, you've had great ideas and wonderful ways to, for those who don't do a lot of patchwork or sewing, can make something
In one night.
spectacular.
That's right.
That's great. Thanks, Joyce.
You're welcome.
Since 1987, the APQS Hobbs Bonded Fibers Fashion Show and Contest has been one of the most popular events at the American Quilter Society Quilt Show. Both experienced garment makers and daring quilters from around the world modeled their traditional and innovative creations on the runway during this primarily maker-modeled show. Leather, silk, vintage obi, suede, tulle, organza, velvet, rayon, and cotton were some of the fabrics used in these creations. Fabrics were creatively transformed by hand and over-dyeing, painting, stenciling, photo transfer, chenilling, and silk screening. Fashion contestants use a variety of quilting techniques: hand and machine patchwork and applique, crazy patch, trapunto, Seminole patchwork, prairie points, and piping. The finishing touches may be embroidery, beading, couching, and innovative quilting with specialty and glitzy threads. To enter the contest, the artists choose one of three categories: professional ensemble, amateur ensemble, or separates, jacket or vest. Slides of the completed garments are sent to AQS for jurying. The 30 semifinalists are then notified to bring their creations for the judges' close-up review. During this review, the judges will look at overall design of the garment, choice of fabrics and colors, and workmanship and finishing techniques. Final judging is done on the runway during the fashion show. The judges select Best of Show, a $1,500 cash award, sponsored by Hobbs Bonded Fibers. Design Excellence Award, a top Bernina sewing machine, sponsored by Bernina of America, and first, second, and third places in each category. The audience selects the viewer's choice. You could be one of the winners in the next AQS Hobbs Bonded Fibers Fashion Contest. The rules are available on the AQS website, www.aqsquilt.com, so you can start your creation today.
I'd like to talk to you about some needle tips for those of you that are freehanding and freewheeling. Between all the different brands of needles, there is a different sculpture to each one. And even though they're the same size needle, like a 135 by 7, the sculpture may be different. So if you're timed to a certain brand, stick with that same brand unless you plan on retiming. Also, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the placement of the needle. The needle has a groove in it from the top to the bottom, and if you'd refer to the manual that came with your machine, you'll know which way that is supposed to go. And I would say that the machine moves forward going this way and moves backward going that way. Backward, it builds just a little bit more heat and struggles just a little bit more with the thread the way it moves inside the bobbin case. And if you are having a lot of thread breakage going backwards, I would say that if you were looking at the needle from the top down and you loosened it and turned it clockwise just a hair, and I do mean just a hair, you will probably be able to change the relationship of the hook to the needle, and you may have better luck with that thread running backwards and less breakage. Also, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the manufacturer's recommendation for 40 hours per needle before you change it. But I would say test it out. Take and let it go across your fingernail and see if you get a scratch. If you get one, it's time to change that needle. If you don't, you might be able to leave it a little longer.
Thank you for watching this episode of Quilt Central number 212, Dressed Up in Quilted Style. Join us next time for Quilting for the Equestrian, Quilting for the Horse Lovers in our lives. Quilt around the clock. Visit the Quilt Central website at www.quiltcentraltv.com for more information on this program. Quilt Central is made possible in part by Bernina of America. Nothing sews like a Bernina. Nothing. Quilting Machines International, providing quilting machines and supplies for the world. Sulky of America, taking creativity to new heights with decorated threads, stabilizers, and books. American Professional Quilting Systems, hand-guided elegance. The American Quilter Society, dedicated to promoting today's quilter. Paducah, McCracken County Convention and Visitors Bureau. Paducah, where no one is a stranger. Additional funding was provided by these companies that care about quilting. Celebrate quilting in your everyday living. To purchase videotapes of this or any episode of Quilt Central, you may call 1-866-PADUCAH.